So, how do you identify when you are in a toxic cycle, when you are in an unhealthy relationship? For women, it is imperative that we identify and we break this cycle because for us, it could mean life or death, honestly. Unfortunately, the most dangerous person to a woman are her men around her, her in her family, and the men we choose to marry. So it is vital that we learn to identify and break these toxic cycles, especially when it pertains to romantic relationships before it is too late. My name is Miss Carol. I am a former career teacher. Now, here with you, humbly in service to share everything that I've learned over my healing journey about self acceptance and love, appreciation, forgiveness, compassion, so that we can all create and cultivate more meaningful relationships. And again, it can be challenging to identify when you are in the midst of one of these toxic cycles because it just begins to feel like normal life. And depending on how long you've been in the midst of it, it could be weeks or months or years. And you've lived this way for such a long time that it's really hard to see things from any other point of view. I love this quote from Sheila Johnson, who was the CEO of BET. I don't know if she's currently still the CEO, but she said that when you're in an abusive relationship, you really have no idea how you lose your sense of self. It comes down to this idea of death by 1,000 cuts. If somebody was to walk up to you right away and tell you, "Hey, I'm your self-sabotage," or "Hey, I plan on betraying you," or "Hey, I'm gonna, lie and manipulate you," you would run screaming. Obviously, you wouldn't subject yourself to that. But these things and these people that come into our lives are much more insidious. They're much more intelligent than that. And we really do have to learn to use our perception to guide us through this terrain in navigating romantic relationships. And it can be really challenging because depending on how much you're putting yourself out there in a romantic way, you could be having things come at you from all different angles. You could be having men approach you at the gym. You could be having men approach you at work. You could be having men approach you online. It could be a myriad of things, and it can be very, very overwhelming. And then after all that, you decide to give one a chance just to find yourself in a toxic cycle. And that can be extremely disheartening because, like me, I was single for a really long time. I was single for about 6.5, 7 years in between relationships. And looking back on it now, I allowed a lot of things to come into my life because I was just so eager to be in another relationship because that's the kind of person that I've always been. I was in a relationship when I was in my younger years. I was in a relationship when I was in my 20s. And they were very healthy, successful relationships. I talk to my sister all the time, and I just talked to her maybe about a month or so ago, and I told her, I said, you and my brother-in-law probably have the healthiest relationship of anybody in my life right now. And she was so touched by it, but it was absolutely true. They have been together for 7 years. They're expecting their first baby. They went through COVID together. They went through lockdown together. And the way they communicate, I mean, it's amazing. It's really amazing. And, my sister didn't have we had completely different romantic lives. This is basically her first relationship, first adult relationship, whereas I had a few successful adult relationships when I was younger. And now as I've gotten older, they've gotten much more challenging. So identifying when you're in these toxic cycles, when you are in a toxic cycle. Well, the first and most acute way that you can recognize and where you can identify is your stress level. Stress. Stress is not a bad thing necessarily. Stress is something that your body is telling you to be aware of. Be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what's in front of you, be aware of who is around you. Stress is a good thing because it encourages your body to give you the energy that you're going to need in order to do whatever is required for whatever situation you find yourself in, whether that's run, whether that's stay put, whatever that is, whether that's scream and yell. However, when stress turns into anxiety, anxiety is much more chronic. Anxiety is like stress on top of stress on top of stress on top of stress. So when you have these interactions with this person that you are with, are your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors attached to feelings of anxiety, of feelings of unworthiness, of feelings of and you really just unpredictability. You really just don't know what to expect. Because again, stress and anxiety are not bad things in the doses that we are supposed to be taking them in. But in high levels, we can almost turn the volume up so much that when we are actually in danger, we really don't realize it until honestly, it can be too late. It's kind of like if you eat too much sugar, it like tampers your taste buds, so where if you eat a piece of fruit or you eat a vegetable, it's almost like you can't taste it because you've been putting so much sugar on your palate, so you've kind of washed away your palate. So the first thing to identify these toxic cycles is your stress level. Where is your stress level? Even before you've been or get into the presence of this person, what are the feelings that that are coming up for you? Is this stress turning into anxiety? There's another quote that I really love by Tony Robbins, and I'm paraphrasing, and he said that, the quality of your life is going to be determined by the quality of your relationships. And I love that quote because it so speaks to my objective in life. And that is really, or one of my objectives, and that's to really create and cultivate a sense of community around me. But I do understand that it has to start with me. And we can't expect to have these quality relationships with other people when we have not cultivated the relationship with ourselves. And sometimes when we find ourselves in this toxic cycle, it can be because of somebody else doing something egregious and something that is not in alignment with our values and our purpose. But it also can be with, it's time that I need to focus on me and focus on what are my values? What do I hold dear to me? Because as we grow, as we get older, the values that I had when I was in my 20s are not the same values that I have now. One of the interesting ones that I really came to an epiphany about recently was like, I don't think I need the person to be best friends with their exes, but I do want someone who, if we were to see them on the street, they wouldn't turn and run the other way. There has to be some sense of respect, some sense of, maybe the relationship didn't work out, but this is still a really great person. And that's kind of just one of the realizations that I've come to recently. So maybe it's just time that we let go of that person, that thing that we are grasping onto, and focus on, okay, where am I at in my life right now? What are the things that are important to me? What are the things that are going to bring me joy, that are going to bring me freedom, that are going to bring me peace? Because we cannot give what we do not have. We can't offer someone peace. We cannot offer someone acceptance and compassion if we ourselves are not demonstrating that with ourselves. So again, the relationship that we have with ourselves is paramount. And unfortunately, we get into these cycles because we feel like we have to have 100% understanding of like what this person is doing and who they're doing it with, and why they did this and why they did that, and all of that is just an excuse to stay in the cycle, to stay in the toxicity, to stay in an unhealthy relationship. Because deep down we really do know, if you have to question whether or not someone is faithful, that's probably your answer right now. I just listened to this song. I think it was by like Coco Jones, and like the song title is literally "Is It Mine?" or something like that. And my whole thing is just like, girl, if you got to ask, that means that you already have your answer. So we definitely know it is not required that we have 1000% understanding of this person, this situation before we make our exit. I love to compare it to when I'm sitting on the bus or I'm sitting on the train. If somebody sits next to me, or if I sit in a seat where somebody sits or somebody around me smells, I get up and I move. There is no law against getting up and just leaving. You do not have to subject yourself to offenses of any kind, whether that's offenses through your nose, offenses, through your ears, offenses through somebody obviously touching you. You don't have to subject yourself to that. You can just get up and leave, right? And again, as women, it is so imperative that we recognize and are aware of these signs. And then, so that leads to, okay, now that you've identified, because you know that this person is bringing up stress, you bringing up anxiety. Okay, so how do you break this now? Well, it's awareness. That awareness, it creates the space that you need in your mind, in your heart, to ask yourself questions. Is this the most high vibration version of myself? Is this person or is this relationship allowing me to grow deeper into my spirituality? Because again, I was one person before I read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, and I was a completely different person on the other side of that. And that was only like a 3-month period, maybe a little shorter than that. So these things can happen really quickly. Do not underestimate your capacity to change and the time that it takes for that to happen. You could realize that the shoe just don't fit no more. It just doesn't fit anymore. And that has to be okay, because the longer that you stay with someone where the shoe is not fitting metaphorically, it creates resentment. It creates those feelings of bitterness. And when you look back on your life, and especially the quality of your relationships, it is imperative that you look back with reverence and say, you know what, I invested that time, and it was not wasted, because I can look back on those relationships and say, I really hope that person is doing the best that they can do. I really hope that they have found someone that's better suited for them than I was at that time. And that brings you that much more deeper into your peace, But it's hard. It is not easy, because we are sold this narrative of perfection, especially as it pertains to romantic relationships. This person has to be my business partner. They have to be my manager. They have to be my financial advisor. They have to be my best friend. They have to be passionate in the bedroom. They have to wear all of these hats, because we don't have a community around us. Back in the days, we had 20, 30 people to fill these roles. And now, since we're so individualistic and we're so isolated, we look for one person to fill what used to be 25, 30 people, to do. And it's just unfair. It's unfair of the other person to expect that they're going to be able to fulfill all these things. And it's unfair to yourself. So right now, the best thing that you can do, the most productive thing that you can do, the most loving thing that you can do for yourself and for that other person, is to step back and say, I'm going to take some time for myself. I don't know how long that is going to be, but this is what I feel called to do. And just know that you will be supported, know that you will be guided to the next steps, and trust, because these issues that we are having, These toxic cycles, like all of the problems that we face, really kind of boil down to only two things: about surrender and about trust. Do you trust that you will be supported? Can you surrender these ideas and these narratives that you are attached to? Because if something is really meant to be yours, it's going to be yours, regardless if it's today, tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 years. You really do have to trust that what is yours will be yours. And let this idea of perfectionism go, because we're all looking for balance. We're all looking for an equilibrium. Cycles are just that. There's this wonderful book by Richard Rohr called Order, Disorder, Reorder. And basically it's the arc of wisdom. And you have to have all three components, but we often get stuck in one of the cycles, and we don't allow ourselves to flow into the next one. So if you're hearing this is confirmation that it is time to let that go, so you can be open to creating the relationship with yourself that is going to be necessary to create a wonderful, loving, whatever, platonic, poly, whatever kind of relationship you are looking for. I am very proud that you have chosen to be here with me and continue to show up. Please keep doing the work. Do the work regardless if you're getting patted on the back or not. Do the work regardless if anybody is seeing it. You will be acknowledged. Trust me. Leave a comment, ask me a question. I'm happy to answer. Again, my name is Miss Carol. I love you, my friends. Be well.